Aloha. Welcome to the Walking in Aloha, Let's Talk Story podcast. We're so glad to have you here. Et como mai. Now here's our podcast host and award-winning author, Michelle.
Aloha, everyone, and thank you for coming in. Welcome to the Walking in Aloha Let's Talk Story podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Ebalaroza Kawano, also known as MAGEK. That is my initials. Sounds like magic. And I'm so grateful that you're joining us here today. Whether you're watching live or watching the replay, this podcast is a space for real conversations, meaningful stories, and global connections where we walk in purpose, presence, and love, one story at a time. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to welcome you who may be joining us for the very first time on the Walking in Aloha Let's Talk Story podcast. Here on this podcast, over the course of almost a year, maybe over a year, I've had the honor of sitting down with guests from all over the world, from Africa to Egypt to Spain and North America, China, and right here on the shores of Hawaii. Each guest brings a unique story, culture, and calling. What ties every one of these conversations together is aloha. Aloha is more than a greeting. And for me, writing my book, Walking in Aloha, 5 Steps to Living Your God Potential Life, aloha is affirmations and actions, aligning what we speak on how we move. And L for leadership and love, leading ourselves and others with integrity and compassion. And O for overcoming obstacles, using our voice to move through fear and resistance, which is for health and healing, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And the last A is acute awareness, living intentionally, awake, and aligned with who we are created to be. As the foundation for this show, I often return to this scripture, 1 Corinthians 13:13. And now these 3 things remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. And with that, I want to begin today's conversation. Today, Julie joins us from Australia, adding her voice to the global community of guests who walk in Aloha. Julie Vigor is a leadership and well-being speaker, educator, and the founder of Connect and Rise. And the future is human movement. The future is human movement. I love that. With over 20 years of experience helping individuals and organizations strengthen well-being by boosting what she calls the human algorithm. She's also the creator of the HEART framework: harmony, empathy, accountability, respect, and trust. And the Micro Acts Challenge, which encourages small intentional actions that create meaningful and lasting change. I love that. Julie, welcome to the Walking in Aloha Let's Talk Story podcast. I'm so grateful to have you here. Before we start, I know that we have a list of questions. I do that with all of my guests, but I would love for you to share how you began your journey and the experiences that you had that led you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I've just moved to Brisbane, which is in Queensland, Australia. I've just moved from Townsville, which is North Queensland, if you know where the Great Barrier Reef is, one of the great wonders of the world. And I have moved here to be a professional speaker because I want to talk about connection, because connection is the essence of being human. And we're racing towards a world full of AI, and everybody wants to use AI. It's a great tool, but we have to remember connection, and that's what ties us together. And that's what means a lot to me.
That is true. Connection. And mentioning AI, I've seen it a lot where there is that disconnect because people think that AI is just something that they're just going to throw in there. But yeah, that's important to know that the human connection is what we truly need in this world, not more tech, right? Not more tech.
That's it.
So let's begin with the first A in Aloha, which is affirmations and actions. So you talk beautifully about micro acts, and I love that small micro acts and the power of small intentional actions, affirmations and actions. I always say that affirmations are just wonderful words. You have to have actions behind those affirmations. What are some simple everyday actions people can start practicing to strengthen connection and well-being?
One thing that I often talk about is having a coffee. And ironically, I don't even drink coffee, but it's over a coffee that people have a conversation. And, we live in a world of technology, which, we're using technology to broadcast this today. So it's beautiful to have that as a tool that can connect us in different ways. And we are connected globally right now. But it's also important to sit down with someone in real life over a coffee, or in my case, I love hot chocolate, and enjoying life for that moment and just being in the moment, not checking our phones, but in looking at that person and getting them to feel seen and heard and valued. Because as Brene Brown talks about, connection is the energy that exists when people feel seen, heard, and valued. So to me, just that simple little thing about having a coffee with people, it's been around for years, whether it's cup of tea or whatever you enjoy. But we really need to bring that human connection back, because I guess, when we're 90, we look back on our life, often the things that people say that they regret is that they didn't have enough time with loved ones, and they didn't stay true to themselves, and they wish they'd lived with more joy. So let's think about how we can find joy in those little moments. And, we're so busy looking down at our phones, and, people are all on the commute to work, whether they're on the bus or the train, and they're all looking down at their phones. And people seem surprised when I actually smile or say hello.
Yeah.
We're kind of missing that human connection, sadly.
That is sad but true. Sad but true. I work at the airport, and it's funny, well, not really funny, when people say, "Oh my gosh, you're the first person that smiled at me today." And I'm like, you want to tell them I'm sorry, but that is true sometimes. But it's good that you are the one, right? It's nice when you can say that you are that one. So when people feel overwhelmed or unsure where to start, how can they choose just one action that feels doable and aligned instead of trying to change everything at once?
Yes, well, when I was going through a very stressful time, and I don't know if you know the five most stressful things that can happen in someone's life. Well, just about all of them hit me at the same time. So even though one of those is hard, and when you feel like the ground beneath you is just gone, you feel like your world turned upside down. It's hard to even know what to focus on. So I think we have to find sometimes routine, and it might seem silly, but even just in that moment, making my bed, because at that time I was so stressed that I wanted to just crawl up in bed and not get up. But I forced myself to get up and make my bed. And then I forced myself to walk around the block. And I heard Tony Robbins talk about how he has a cold plunge every day. And I ain't doing that. But he said that he still, after years of doing that every single day, he still does not want to do it.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's forcing ourselves to do these little things to keep the routines going when we're feeling a bit unsteady, that things are stressful. But to do those small things to keep us on track, and to just choose the right step in the right direction, even if it's one little step at a time.
That is so good. So what I'm hearing you say is that the routines is something that kept you going, and that if we just continue to follow those routines, like how you said, even Tony Robbins, he doesn't want to go jump in a cold plunge. I don't even know why. But hey, a lot of people can swear on it, right? But like you said, force yourself to go and walk around the block, force yourself to get out of bed. Those things that don't feel oh so good at first, but in those
Hmm.
routines, once you start doing it, it does actually make you feel better in the long run, right?
Yeah, well, as Nike says, just do it, right?
Just do it. Exactly. And that's
And
funny that you mentioned.
Mel Robbins is very popular these days with her Let Them book. I've read that,
Yeah.
as many people probably have, and she talks about counting to 5 and just doing it. And she talks about walking as well, putting on her sneakers. When you get to 5, you're just going to do it whether you feel like it or not, because most of us don't feel like doing stuff. Exercise is not something I like doing, but we got to force ourselves to keep moving.
Yeah, that is important. Forcing yourself to keep moving. So good.
So I
So
usually like to
Elle,
walk where there's water. So you guys probably got beautiful water around you. So I used to like walking along the Strand in Townsville so I could see the water, or around the river as well. So I find water calming.
yeah, that is always good. There's a place, it's Ko'olina, and it's a very nice hotel area, right? But I love the way that they built it, and you're able to go and just walk on the paths at the, like right around the hotel and everything like that. But it's right around the beach. And so you go through the near the lagoons and everything like that, and it's really super nice. And especially like if I'm, like by myself or something like that, and I don't want to go out where it may not be so safe, because Hawaii is Hawaii and it's nice, but there's a lot of tourists. And so a lot of times you're like, I'm not so sure if this area is so safe with all these people. So, but when you're in the hotel area, you kind of know it's more safe because it's secure. So, especially sunset. I love walking during the sunset time, but then it's going to get dark. So you don't want to go where it's going to get dark and you're by yourself. But yeah, thinking about those kind of things. But yes, the water is somewhere I love to be by. I was born and raised here in Hawaii, so the ocean is always
Yeah.
my place.
And I find having an accountability partner is so important, because there's so many days where if that person can't come to the walk for some reason,
Yeah.
then I just think, oh, well, maybe I'll just, catch up on my social media for my business that day, or maybe I'll just, relax today.
Mhm.
So I think if we have that accountability person, that really helps us, because then we go, okay, well, I can meet that person and we've arranged to meet at 5 o'clock. So I'm going to be there. And
Yeah.
then you're walking along and you're chatting and you don't even feel like you're exercising. So that feels perfect to me. Talking at the same time.
Yeah, and then the time flies by, right?
Yeah.
Oh wow, we walked so far, and we did
Hmm.
our 30 minutes or an hour or whatever it is. So good. So the L in Aloha is leadership and love. What leads, wait, not what, sorry, I'm choking. But that leads us into through your heart framework, the heart framework. And I love the way that you have that. I have Aloha, you have heart, which is amazing. Leadership is deeply human, right? What does leading with empathy and love look like in real life? Not just theory. Because I know,
Mm.
like people can say things, but truly, really meaning it is different. So, what does it look like to you?
Yeah. So the heart framework is based like a pyramid shape. So I don't know if you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I talk about the heart and the heart hierarchy of workplace needs. And in Maslow, the bottom part of the pyramid is your safety and your belonging, because those are your essential needs. And at the top of Maslow is your self actualization, where you're living your best potential. And that we can't actually be creative in life and get our best potential if we don't have the bottom part, which is the safety and the belonging. So that is why I based mine in that shape, because what I've put down the bottom for the T is trust. Because if we don't have that trust as the foundation, we don't have that psychological safety. That's where a lot of people don't feel safe to even speak up in their workplace anymore. So that's got to be our foundation. And then we're building on that and having respect for each other, different cultures, different backgrounds. We all come from different walks of life. We have different opinions, and then as we go up, we then have we've got the T, we've got the R, and then we've got the A. So that's accountability. And then the E is empathy, empathy for each other. And the top is harmony. So AH is harmony, because that's what essentially we want, right? Is we want harmony in our workplace. And then people are going to want to come to work. And once people want to come to work, the productivity actually increases. And so, for a leader of an organization, you want your productivity up because that's going to have profits up. So, even though it feels like your human connection is just your soft skills, it actually relates down to data and money when it ends anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, because if your team isn't productive, then what does the company look like, right? Yeah.
And you look at Canva, for example. So, Canva was created by Melanie Perkins as the founder. And
Mhm.
she's created a workplace where people want to come to work. It's a $42 billion company now where people feel safe to be able to create and experiment and innovate. So, it shows that those sort of cultures that value each other as humans, they work and they make lots of money.
Yeah. So, so true. Can you share a moment from your own journey or from someone you've worked with where leading with heart truly changed that outcome?
Yeah, well, I've definitely seen different sides of leadership in my experience. So I've been a teacher and a trainer assessor and all of those types of things in different educational environments. So I worked in a men's prison a couple of years ago, which was a very challenging environment. And when I first walked in there, the first thing that somebody said to me was, "Watch out for the staff." And I thought, that's a really odd thing to say. Why would someone say in a prison, which is full of people that have done atrocious things, why would they say, watch out for the staff? And you know what? They're right. So after
Wow.
6 months, I left that job because of the toxic nature of the staff, of leadership, of management, of how I was spoken to, and colleagues as well, undermining and not having that trust that we talked about before. So unfortunately, that sort of environment is quite male dominated. And unfortunately, it was the females in that environment that felt as though they had to be aggressive when we don't need to be an assertive leader in an aggressive way. So I've
Hmm.
seen on the flip side a principal of a school, which was the biggest school in Townsville at the time. There's a lot of students there. And that principal, she would walk out to the pedestrian crossing at the front of the school, and she had the most beautiful hair that she didn't want to put a hat on, so she'd have her little umbrella, and she knew every child's name in a really big school, and she would greet them, say goodbye every afternoon. And so she modeled that leadership. And when we see leaders leading like that, and then the
Hmm.
way they treat us, at that time, like I was a fairly new teacher and, having a family and things like that. So for me, my baby photos were the most precious thing to me. And even though she's very busy, she took the time to look at the photos and connect with me and, oh, cute baby, those sort of things. So like you feel valued and she appreciated our work and we wanted to work harder. It's her because she created the right environment.
Yeah. It's always good when you have that. I've worked in places where you're like, you dread going to work because of the people that you work with. And then there's places where, yeah, you're right. You tend to work harder, you do more, really when you don't have to, just because you enjoy being there. You know, there's places where I've worked at and they thought that I actually owned the establishment because of the way I work. I was like, no, I don't own it.
Yeah.
I just love working here, that kind of thing, right? And it's just it should be that way. If you really think about it, more companies should look at that and it should be that way because then you're not going against the grain, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, you actually wanna get out of bed and go to work on Monday.
Yes,
That would be nice if we all said, "Thank God it's Monday."
right. Not waiting for Friday to come around so you have a weekend. That's so
That
good.
school that I was talking about before, the staff, the morale was amazing. And we did have Good Friday after school. We had the Friday chat and the Friday drinks and things like that.
Yeah.
And then we had a social once a term, and you always look forward to that. And people went to the staff room. And, I found over the years in teaching, and it probably is in a lot of other industries as well, where less and less people are talking to one another at lunchtime. They're all on their phones, or they're not even going to a staff room, and people are
Yeah.
connecting less, unfortunately, with devices.
Yeah. I was a lead at one of the schools that I worked at. I did early childhood education for so many years. One of the things that I did was I actually brought in, those coloring books, those adult coloring books, and I put it in the break room. And I didn't ask no one if I could do it or not, but I was like, I put it in the break room and I brought pens and I put it in there, just a whole tin of pens and everything. I just left it. And then at first it just sat there, like nobody wanted to touch it, right? Like as if it was off limits. And I thought maybe I had it too like nice. Like maybe everybody really did think it was off limits. So I tore out a page. I left it, that kind of thing, like use it, right? And then I colored in some of it. And then I was like, one day I'm sitting there and I'm coloring and I'm talking and I'm like, oh yeah, I brought this. Go ahead. And everybody started talking and more people started just tearing out pages and coloring. And they're like, oh, that was so good, to bring that. And then now people are talking instead of like on their phones and
Yeah.
you know, you can have conversation and do something else. But it was just something for me to get people out of that same old of,
Yeah.
oh, now it's break time and they're complaining because we got to get back to the room or, like, it's like, but it's
Yeah,
so
I worked
good
in a
to,
workplace. There was a giant puzzle that people could work on together over the
yeah,
table. I thought that was pretty cool.
yeah, say things like that. Just something else, right? To get your mind off of what you're doing for a little bit, get together and do something else. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so
Yeah, because I was thinking that you know people say life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get, but I figure life's probably more like the puzzle box because
mhm.
you're trying to piece everything together in life. And then something happens where the 1,000-piece puzzle all falls all over the floor because, all that stress in life and everything gets scattered. And then you got to like rebuild one little piece at a time. But I feel like, if we're all pieces of the puzzle, like we all connect together, right? And,
Mhm. Yeah,
one little puzzle piece in a box, it shouldn't be sitting there on its own. It's got to connect together like humans.
yeah, that's true. And it has to connect, it doesn't make any sense for this one puzzle piece to be sitting out there. There's no use for that one puzzle piece, right? It needs to be connected to something. And
Yeah.
one of my pastors was telling me, like, even like the analogy about like the coals in a fire. If you took one of the coals away from the warmth of all the other coals, that one will soon cool and die out.
Mm.
But if it stayed with the group, right? If it stays, then it'll
Yeah, that's
continue to
beautiful.
burn, right? And so that's the
Yeah.
thing that we need to be doing is to stay connected and stay close, right? In order to continue to burn. So
Because
that's so good.
people's reaction these days is to try to pull away when they're feeling stressed. And, I can understand that that's important at some times to have those recovery periods or those downtimes. But sometimes we have to push ourselves. People feel like, oh, they're too anxious to go to an event these days, or, they're not going to know anybody. But we do have to push through that fear, and that
Yeah.
action creates certainty because, we're not certain before the action. Like the action creates the certainty, and we've got to push through that little bit of anxiety of not knowing people or, an unfamiliar place.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the authors that I helped, she was going through something and, like I don't even live in the same state. I live here on the island and she lives in the mainland. We call it the mainland, right? It's Oregon. She's living on Oregon. Sorry, moving my mic. Sorry if I'm making noise. But I kind of knew she was going through something because of the way she was commenting on stuff. And I was like, something's
Yeah.
amiss. It didn't seem like herself, right? So I called and I talked with her. And the first thing I saw was that she was like so sullen, so sad. And she kept saying she was fine. Like how people say,
Yeah.
how many times you ask, how are you? And they're like, oh, I'm good. I'm great.
Yeah.
And they walk away, but they're really not. And so anyway, I asked her and like we were talking and I said, "Oh, did you go to church today?" And she's like, "No, no, God wanted me to stay home." It was like, I was like, honestly, I have to tell you that I don't think God wanted you to stay home. I don't think God wanted you to be in this darkened room right now because, we're on Zoom and I can see the room is darker, and I know that it's day, but the lights were out and it was dark in her room.
Yeah.
And so we talked, and yeah, she was going through some things that she wasn't letting out.
Yeah.
So it was so nice to be able to talk with her, and she felt so much better that someone actually cared enough to reach out,
Mm-hmm.
even when she was saying, "That's all right," that kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
knowing more because that is the connection, right? If you have that true connection with people, you would really see that something's really not okay. Are you truly all right? And not just be like, well, fine then, and leave. You said you're okay. I'm out. And just
Yeah.
be like,
Yeah. Like we have that day, Are You Okay Day. I'm not sure if that's international or national, but it's a great thing that we are talking more about mental health. But we also need to remember that if you just say to someone, "Are you okay?" you're not necessarily going to get the answer because they'll either just say yes or they won't answer at all. People
yeah,
often are not going to come out and say it. However, in saying that, I did my mental health first aider accreditation and I just wanted to help people in the community. And I put out a post to say, does anyone want to have a coffee and to talk? And these were people I had never met. And I was amazed at the amount of people that wanted to go have a coffee and talk about their life story. And they were telling me their whole life story within, 5 minutes of meeting them. Because when people finally get that opportunity, they do actually want to talk and that somebody hears them and sees them.
yeah, yeah. Just to be heard, to be seen, and to know that someone really, truly wants to listen to you. Because a lot of times in their own lives, they may feel like nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to listen to me anyway. So
Hmm.
then they turn away from stuff. But when someone actually says, let's go grab a coffee and, you know, we can talk. So that's one reason why my podcast is called Walking in Aloha, Let's Talk Story. It's because of the fact that I felt that people didn't take time to really talk and hear each other, right? How many people they just talk and they just wait until they get that space so they can say what they
Mm.
want to say, but they're really not listening. They're just waiting for. I tell my husband that all the time. You're not really listening. You're just waiting for your time to say something else, right? Did you just hear
To
me?
reply, yeah.
To reply, to
Yeah.
reply. But yeah, I
Or
love
not
that.
listening at all and looking at a device.
True, true.
Yeah.
But that is so good. Connection. So the O in overcoming obstacles. we'll go to that one. In your work, what are some of the most common obstacles that you've seen when it comes to the real human connection? What are some of the common obstacles you see?
Well, there's a lot, I guess. Like everybody goes
Other than
through
home.
something. Everybody goes through something at some time. So, yeah, people are always going to go through that stressful period of life. But
Mhm.
I found that when I put out a Facebook group and I started reaching out to people to say, who wants connection? I couldn't believe it that 2,000 people joined in a fortnight. That's a
Wow.
lot of people responding to a call out for connection. So it showed me that I wasn't the only one who felt alone, that people do want to connect when it comes down to it. And when I started hearing all their stories, like everybody is overcoming their own obstacle. Like I think years ago, people didn't used to talk about it. And then we thought, the grass is greener on the other side. Everyone else's lives are better than mine. And sometimes we can still have that with social media where we only see the highlight reels, right, of all the great stuff that's happening in people's lives. But when you really start to talk to people and you hear the real story, like you hear that, yes, they have overcome amazing things, with some awful things people have had to deal with. And when I was feeling very alone with a forced empty nest, I met so many other women who were also in a similar situation, or, there's always people worse off than us. And I had this lady in my group. She ended up being my bestie, believe it or not. Um, so we actually bonded over bling. We're both very girly, but we are both empaths as well. And she said, "Would I be interested in going to see a Michael Jackson tribute show?" I said, "Yeah, definitely." So I'd not met this lady, but I offered to pick her up because she had spent years in bed, just chronic
Ah.
back pain, and she was just so lonely. And she used to love going out and dressing up. And so I picked her up and I gave her a big hug. And I never met this lady before, but I was excited for her that she got to go out and, overcome what her life had become of just sitting in bed, scrolling on her phone and looking at things to buy that she couldn't afford and things like that. So, we just sang all night and all the old Michael Jackson songs. It was really fun. And we just really bonded and we became best friends after that. So, I feel like, we can really find something in someone. And even though they've gone through a hard time, we can still find something that they like. And, I used to get my TAFE students to sit down with someone that they don't normally sit down with because, people like the little routines of who they sit next to and things. But, I'd change it up and go find someone that you don't normally talk to and find 3 things that you have in common with that person. And at first I thought, one's 18 and one's 60 and they're just not going to have anything in common. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we both like crime shows or something, they'll find things. And then they've got points of conversation to talk about.
That is so good. I like that, especially like it's not, I mean, kind of forced, but no, go find someone else. Go find someone else that you're not normally sitting next to and, ask them these questions and doing what you did, which is inviting people that you don't even know. You don't even know because you never know the connection that you're going to make. And like you said, she became your bestie and you're like, you guys are going to see Michael Jackson. It's so fun, those kind of things. I find that it is amazing. I love the fact that, like I said, I live here in Hawaii. Hawaii is literally, like they say, the most isolated spot on the planet. We are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Our islands are so small. Actually, if you connect it under the water, we're pretty big, but who sees under the water? But the connection, right? And I realized that as I travel the world, people have a connection to Hawaii. Somehow, some way, they have a connection to knowing about Hawaii, ever been to Hawaii, or something. Anytime they know that I'm from Hawaii, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I've always wanted to go to Hawaii," or something. There's always a
It's on
connection.
everybody's bucket list.
Exactly. And I was the one person that was saying, "I'm leaving this island. I live on a rock. I'm never coming back," you know, because I was born and raised here. So at first I didn't know the value that I had. But once I left and I realized that, came back and I've never left since. But I just love that because we are all connected somehow. And like you said, they were talking and they find, yeah, we both like crime shows or whatever. Somehow, some way, you will find connection if you are intentional, right?
Yes.
Enough to sit, ask, talk, make
Mm-hmm.
those connections. You'll
Be
find it.
curious. Mm-hmm.
You'll find it. So when people become more aware of those obstacles, what helps them move forward instead of pulling away or shutting down? So I know that people get all shy or whatever it is or fearful. Maybe it's rejection. Maybe it's something. What do you think
Mm-hmm.
those things are?
Yeah, I definitely think that people have a lot of social anxiety these days. And
Mhm.
they feel like they're going to be judged, that no one's going to want to talk to them. And so I put on a lot of events for ladies when I was living in Townsville. I'm not doing the women's events anymore, but during that period, I would do things like paint and sips. And the reason I chose things like that is because a lot of people didn't want to just have lunch and have to look someone in the eye over the table and have to have that really intense conversation. I had those sort of events as well, but I would encourage people, if you go to a paint and sip or something where you're doing an activity, you're sitting beside the person, not opposite them often, and you're doing the activity and you're just focused on, and, like my paint and sips was, like you did with the calm coloring. I already had the template. It was like coloring because they didn't have to be great artists. So we're just focusing on the process, not the product, and
Mhm.
then people felt like, okay, I'm not forced into talking to someone the whole time. I can just do the activity. And then when I feel comfortable enough during that period, I can then start talking to the person. And then they might go get a little coffee over here and then start have a little chat, and I just feel like when people do activities that they feel less anxious about having to speak the entire time.
Yeah. I think that is so true. Because if you're sitting there and it's kind of awkward if you're just sitting at a table and you're all looking at each other like, "Oh, what do we say? Right? What do we
Yeah.
do?" But if you're doing something together, then it becomes different. And
Mm.
I'm an artist. I do paint and I've done it with a lot of different people. I brought it to different companies, to different organizations, women's groups, homeless, um, like homeless shelters, or I think I even did it with moms that were in, I don't know, I don't want to say like protective, what is it? Protective housing, I guess it's kind of like that. There's a word for it. Anyway, it was them and their children, and they were in a safe house. Brought it there, and, you know, like, I always have a topic, but not like everyone needs to follow the same thing. It's just, but as we're doing that, the painting or whatever it is, just working through that, being able to kind of like work through what you're going through your artwork. And then
Mm.
as they're working, they kind of need to ask like, can I get that purple over there for you? Something,
Yeah, that's right.
right? And they have to like collaborate or something. Can I borrow that brush or whatever? And they start talking, and then pretty soon everyone's talking, and then they're like, "Oh, can I see?" And everyone's it's it always ends up so like everyone's so happy.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get all nervous about like what they're getting at, like, "Oh no,
Yeah.
I don't like the way that this is turning out," or whatever.
Yeah.
But then someone will come out and say, "Oh, no, that is really good," and then you see them helping each other out, and you see them talking and encouraging each other, it's just so good. And it's that importance of that connection of just being there, putting the phone aside, putting all the other stuff aside and connecting. So yeah, so good, so good. Such an important reminder to continue to connect. We all connect in different ways, but sometimes when you're brought into like a paint and sit where you're all doing the same thing, then we can all be like, hey, we got more in common than we think.
And mine never looks like the person at the front, but it doesn't matter. Process than the product.
Right. It doesn't matter. But then you find out that you really did have more in common with people in the room than you think. And you guys had a conversation and you guys ended up, it's just that way. So it's so good. But the H in Aloha is health and healing. Well-being is at the core of everything you do. And how does emotional well-being influence how people show up at work, at home, and even in leadership?
Well, it just affects everything, doesn't it?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I've experienced the highs and the lows, and I feel like sometimes when we look back and we think, gee, I was probably living the dream back then. I was going on holidays and this, that, and there was ballet rehearsals and this, that with the kids. And, on the outside, everything looks great. But on the inside, like a lot of the times we're feeling so tired, we're exhausted, we're trying to fit everything in, often like, I was exhausted single mum and trying to balance it all. And, of course, ballet is at the opposite end of the town to soccer. Luckily, I had my mother there because there were two different places at once. So sometimes having that support network is really handy. And for some people that don't have that extended family, but, definitely with the women's group that I established, people then started making some really good support network there and they didn't feel so alone. And then like just everything changed, like the whole outlook changed. I just started having a bit of more joy. I remember when I was it was my daughter was maybe I'd like 12 maybe, like we went to this free concert in the Botanic Gardens. We went to see this singer and we both loved him. So we were like, the rain started pouring down and everybody went home. And then, usually I would have been that sensible mum to like, oh no, we better go home, we better get out of the rain. But I was like, nope, we're staying to watch this singer. So we're like, on the front fence looking up like little groupies and singing the songs and like just giggling. Like, here I am in my 40s or whatever, but I'm giggling
Yeah.
like I'm a teenager. And we're running back to the car in the rain. And I feel like we just forget like that there's little moments of joy, that make our well being so much better. Because as adults, we're like drudgery of life, right? And oh, I have
Yeah.
to do this and I have to do that. But he's like, well, in the time, like I get to drive my kids to soccer and ballet. Like I actually now feel like I miss that. Even though at the time it feels like it's a chore.
Yeah. You know, my kids are all grown. They, like it's just me and my husband here. And so they're grown. My grandkids are, and they all live in the mainland, right? So I have to literally like get on a plane. I have to go get on a plane to go see them. There's two that do live here, but the the divorce and everything between my son and her wasn't good. So now it's like a strained relationship with us. So it's like, I don't know. So you know what I mean? But it's just to have that like I miss that. I miss when the kids were little. I do. Where it did feel like how you said it felt like a chore at one point. As I'm older now, I'm gonna be 58, I'm like, man, I wouldn't mind taking them to the library, that kind of thing. Especially when you're like waiting there and you're like, did you get your books yet? Come on. No, take your time. I'd be like, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind sitting at the library while they're picking out their books. So
Yeah, well, in those times of really stressful periods, we then look back at those other times and think, well, I wish I had that life again, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Because then you now compare it with the stuff you're going through now, and you're like, oh, that was so much easier.
Yeah,
True,
when you
right?
think
It's so much
when
easier.
your child's 3 and you're like, "Oh my goodness," the whole, you know, temper tantrums and that, and then you think that's bad, and then the teenager, that's
Yeah.
way worse.
Yeah. Then you're like, I would rather have you have three. So yeah, the way life goes, right? But for someone entering a new season or rebuilding after burnout, what are some early signs that healing and balance are beginning to take root? 'Cause I feel that is an important thing that we need to look at, like going through it all, and you're like, is it really happening? Am I really getting anywhere? What is it that
I
people
think
can
we
look
have to
at?
be intentional, right? So we have to choose. We have to choose our boundaries. We have to
Mhm.
choose who we're going to surround ourselves with because, some people drain our energy, some people are like sunshine, and some people are like dark clouds and they like make us feel small and sad.
Yeah.
So it's like being intentional about who you're going to choose to be around and choose who you are going to become. Because, when you go through those stressful periods, like all you can do is just take one little step in the right direction and just keep going. But we just keep making those little choices and those little micro acts along the way. And just those 1% things that just all add up. Right?
Yeah. That's the thing. Those small little steps. Because sometimes we think that it needs to be some big action to change things, but it really isn't. It's those small little micro steps and those things. And like you said, it adds up. It does. It truly does add up. So the last in Aloha is acute awareness. Acute awareness. So, how does becoming more aware of ourselves and others change the way that we connect and lead?
It's a bit of a hard question. Can you just reframe it for me?
So, becoming more aware of ourselves. So, like, how does becoming more aware of ourselves, looking at ourselves, how does that change the way that we connect with others or lead? Like, because we have to look at ourselves first in order to do anything else for others, right? So, how does becoming more
Yeah, so
aware?
I probably did a bit of both. So
Um,
I was like looking at myself to choose who I wanted to be, but I was also looking outward and I was trying to think how I could help others because I felt like if I focus on other people and that I have a purpose bigger than myself,
mhm.
that
Good.
I'm not so consumed with the things going wrong in my life that, I have purpose and I have goals. So it's like setting those goals and intentions for ourselves, but then also looking outward and thinking about other people.
So good. Like it was. So the reason why I even came up with, or I didn't, God gave that to me, the aloha, is because when I was going through the domestic violence and I asked, like, how do I get through this? How do I write this out? And he said, I gave you everything in aloha. And so as I looked at all the things that I already went through, it spelled out aloha. And I was like, wow, God, you're good. So the acute awareness was one I was like, now after all of the stuff that I went through, I could see myself as being more like not just aware, but more acutely aware about things, right? You're looking at things and you're like, for you to say that is really controlling. And, so you see things differently now when people talk to you or because you know what you were in before. And you're like, why
Mm.
didn't I notice that before? But sometimes we kind of like ignore those red flags or whatever. But it
Yeah,
was
when we're in the moment.
in the moment, exactly. But it's that acute awareness that helped me out. So yeah, becoming more aware of ourselves, right? And like you said, to look at others, to be like, I have more, like if I do more for other people, or if I can do this for someone else, then I'm not just looking at myself and kind of like, I can move forward, right?
Mm.
So Is there a simple, like, daily check-in or reflection that you recommend for others to help them stay grounded or present in what they're doing in their interactions with others?
I think gratitude is a big one, and
I
it
love that.
it sounds really, really simple.
Mhm.
And when I was going through a really stressful period, like when my mum got cancer and she was my rock, and I just didn't even know how to cope with that diagnosis. And then when a friend was asking me to find something I was grateful for, I really, really struggled with that because I thought my whole world right now is my mum being sick and then I've got to go to see her in the hospital, the aged care of the afternoon.
Mm,
But I had to dig in and find what I was grateful for because life got even tougher after that. Like lots of more things went wrong. And if I didn't find the little tiny things that I was grateful for, just the sunshine, like I love the sun, the warmth, and the fact that I have a warm bed. We have to think about the things that we're grateful for.
yeah. Gratitude is huge. Like just going through the things that I'm going through right now and the things that, like having to thank God for, like you said, the sun. Thank God
Mm,
that I live here in Hawaii. Thank God for, just being thankful, that gratitude. I kind of had a little spot where I'm like, this is so not fair. I'm going through all this stuff, like that. And it's just because of, like times get hard and you tend to forget what you have already. And I'm like, and then I love the way that God actually works with us. And he's like, let me help you out. And so there was this I hardly ever watch TV. Okay. I hardly ever watch TV. This song came up on my phone. And when she was singing it, she was singing about all the bad stuff. Like, and her voice was so sweet and nice. But the lyrics, she was singing about like, thank God for the hell of it, like the thing, and I was like, what? So I had to listen closer and I wanted to know what is she singing about because the lyrics didn't sound good, but yet she's singing so sweet and so nice and thanking God. I'm like, so I listened to it and yeah, it was this, I want to say silly, but it was not silly because I watched it. A camping thing that was on Angel TV or Angel Studio. And it was about these teenagers at this camp, and she's over there and she's singing about, like, yeah, when things are not good, you thank God for those things until they get better. Thank God. And then she said, thank God that I have a black eye. Came to thank God that I will never give my own child a black eye. Right? Those kind of things. And I was like, gosh, I can see what she's saying. And I was like, and so looking at the things that I'm going through right now, knowing that I have now a brain aneurysm that I'm going in on Thursday for this surgery, I can say, thank God that they found it and it didn't find me,
mm,
right? That kind of thing. Thank God that they can do something about it now and that other people can learn more about it. And I'm like, it is what it is. So yeah, there
mm,
is stress and everything like that, but being grateful, that gratitude does help. It is huge. And, some people may be like, "Oh, everybody talks about gratitude, everybody, but it is. It is so true that when you start saying thank you for those things, those small things like the warmth of the sun, for
mm.
the day that you woke up, or whatever, that kind of thing, it is huge. It is
Yeah.
huge. So thank you for that. That is really good. So, if you could invite our listeners to try one small micro act this week, something simple but meaningful, what would you suggest?
I would suggest looking through your phone and finding someone that you haven't talked to for quite a while, but that you'd just love to reconnect. Because life gets busy and sometimes we just lose touch with people. And reach out, send a message, and say, "Hey, I was thinking of you." And, I'm sure it would land really beautifully on that person that they were being thought about. And maybe if you are in the same town, maybe go for that coffee.
That is so, so good. I love that. And, like you said, just look in your phone because you got a whole list of contacts. You probably haven't reached out to someone in a while.
Yeah.
So, as we begin to close, when you think about the legacy you're creating through Connect and Rise and the Heart Framework, what do you hope people will carry forward because of your work?
I want them to remember connection because as the world just gets more and more just so entangled with technology, we can't escape it. It's become part of our everyday life, but we have to force ourselves to keep connecting with people. That is what is important.
That is true. That is so good. Connection. So, yes, thank you so much, Julie, for being on the Walking in Aloha Let's Talk Story podcast today with us. Your voice, your heart, and your message truly matters. Connection matters. And to everyone watching or listening, if today's conversation spoke to you, I invite you to reflect on just that one small action. Pick up your phone, connect with that one person that you haven't connected with in a long time. I know that one person. I'm gonna do it as soon as we're off. And take
Awesome.
this week to connect more deeply with yourself and with others. So, is there any way that people can stay connected with you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they can find me on social media, Connect and Rise. And
Nice.
also, I have a website, Connect and Rise too, and I will be uploading the link shortly to so they can download the micro act challenge. It's not quite up on my website yet, but it will be
Okay.
very soon.
Nice. That's perfect. And I will be putting your social media links in the um the notes once I get this all uploaded. So they will have that. So thank you again for being here.
Beautiful.
Thank you for everything. That was amazing. And I just loved everything you said. So, everyone,
You're very welcome.
thank you for being here. Walk in love, walk in awareness, and always, always, always walk in aloha. Till next time, God's blessings always and a hui hou.
Thank you for joining us here on the Walking in Aloha Let's Talk Story podcast. Before leaving, please hit that subscribe button. God's blessings always and a hui hou.